It is day 214 of the second Trump administration, and tonight, President Trump joined the military and law enforcement he deployed on the streets of Washington, D.C. His remarks included trashing wind energy, bragging about his plans for a White House ballroom, and plans to, quote, regrass Washington parks because, quote, he knows more about grass than any human being. And touting, of course, how many phone calls he's gotten praising him for the D.C. takeover. Meanwhile, Trump's been celebrating the Texas State House passing a new congressional map to help give Republicans more seats. That legislation is now in the hands of the Texas State Senate, where Republicans hold the majority. Once approved, the bill heads to Governor Greg Abbott's desk to sign. In a social media post that encouraged more states to do the exact same thing, Trump also told Republicans to get rid of mail-in voting and move to all paper ballots. Quote, if we do these two things, we will pick up 100 more seats and the crooked game of politics is over. It comes as California moves one step closer to a new congressional map that would help Democrats win more seats there. Just hours ago, the governor signed legislation establishing a special November election that'll let the voters decide whether to adopt the new map in time for next year's midterms. And tonight, he reminded people how we got here.
They fired the first shot, Texas. We wouldn't be here had Texas not done what they just did. Donald Trump didn't do what he just did. He went so far as to follow up and say that he didn't just want those 5 seats. He said he's, quote unquote, entitled to those 5 seats. Just pause and reflect on that. Everything should have just stopped there. President of the United States claiming he's entitled to 5 seats. That should put chills up your spine. Every Republican, not just Democrat and Independent, every American.
And with that, let's bring in our leadoff panel. John Allen, senior national politics reporter for NBC, Maeve Reston, national political reporter for The Washington Post, and Tim Miller, host of the Bulwark podcast and the former communications director for Republican Jeb Bush. All right, John, we've talked about Texas, we've talked about California. This is going to happen in other states. What do we know about other red states that are seriously pursuing this redistricting strategy right now?
We've certainly heard about Indiana. We've heard about Missouri. I think every state where you've got, a super majority or a heavy majority of Republicans or Democrats is going to look at what they're able to do. In some states, they have laws like California does for an independent redistricting commission, and they may have to try to get creative to do it. In other states, the advantage has already been pressed pretty far, and it would be hard to, to squeeze out another district here or there. But, the genie's out of the bottle or the toothpaste's out of the tube, and I don't think they're going back in.
But I guess, John, what's the timeline on all of this? We know that this is happening in Texas. We know California is going to vote on it in November. Is it conceivable that we're going to see this sort of a domino effect and many other states will get in line ahead of the midterms?
Certainly, there's going to be an effort to do so. Again, each state has its own laws. Each state has its own primary calendar. So, it's not possible to make sort of a sweeping generalization about all of them. But President Trump told Texas to go find him 5 more seats. Gavin Newsom's going to try to do basically the same in California, and has been the leader of the Democratic Party on this on a national level, at least the most identifiable one. And he seems to be giving permission, as it were, to other Democratic states to take a look. I just don't think there are a whole lot of other places where the Democrats are going to be successful in redrawing districts to a more partisan advantage.
Maeve, as my fellow Angelino here tonight, we're used to a lot of special elections out in California, but walk us through what between now and the vote on this redistricting plan is going to look like. What's the campaign going to look like?
So it's setting off essentially this 11-week sprint to November 4th. Obviously, the legislature passed the bills that they needed to today. They needed to get them transmitted over to the Secretary of State by a deadline of tomorrow in order to get them onto the November ballot. And we've already seen Governor Newsom raising money from his very enormous small dollar list. His advisors say he's already raised $6 million from small dollar donors. On the other side, you have a Palo Alto physicist, Charles Munger Jr., who is committed to putting resources into the no side, though it's not quite clear yet how much he'll put into that. And then, of course, Kevin McCarthy is planning to get really involved on the no side as well. A lot of these folks that potentially are likely to lose their seats are his former members. So, strategists on both sides are saying that they may have to raise as much as $100 million. And, I think you and I would not be surprised, Jacob, if it ends up being a lot more than that, because contributions to ballot measures in California are unlimited, and we're just going to see the money flow.
Tim, this is not a change to the system per se. This is Donald Trump's stated attempt at making this a one-party country and not having to have elections. Am I wrong about that?
I mean, I don't know. Not having to have elections, maybe slightly hyperbolic, because I think he wants to rig the rules to be as favorable to him as possible. I think that's certainly one thing I'm worried about is having elections and then laying the groundwork to challenge them, just like we saw in 2020. I'm I think more concerned about the post 2026 election period than the pre. Though I think that there are things to be concerned about on both sides. Them deciding that they are not going to seat members in states where there's a certain percentage of mail-in ballots, accusing it of fraud. If Democratic members win in competitive seats but that happen to be in red states with red trifectas, are those going to be approved? Do you have MAGA county officials that are going to certify votes? To me, those are like the real acute concerns. But they're going to try to change the rules as much as possible on the lead-in. And I think you guys kind of talked about this with California and Texas likely being a draw. It gives me a little joy until Maeve said that I hadn't really considered that Kevin McCarthy was going to take another L out of all this. So that's a small silver lining for some of us. But there are a bunch of other red states. I think they could squeeze seats out of Florida, maybe Missouri, Indiana. Potentially, I think as many as 5 to 10 additional Republican seats if those states, do go the path of Texas. I think that, as John said, there's fewer options in blue states. Yeah, maybe you get 1 or 2 out of a couple of them.
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize what you guys have said, which is in the United States, we're sort of the un-United States, as a matter of fact, when it comes to our electoral system. It is a different policies and procedures and practices based on the local election laws and all these different jurisdictions. I remember a time when, you can go back to COVID, when all these places got on board with mail-in voting. We had some of the highest voter participation that we've had in this nation in order to make it more convenient to vote. Before I was a journalist, I was an election reform advocate with a group called Why Tuesday. We wanted to move elections to the weekend. And people like John McCain and Richard Lugar and Mike Huckabee were all on board with ideas like that out of Washington, D.C. But what about now, John? Are Republicans we're talking about Republicans in state houses. Are Republicans in Congress going to get on board with this?
Yes, absolutely. We live in such divided times. It's red jerseys and blue jerseys. Very few people who in politics who don't seek more power. They've run for office to gain power. And I would just say, this isn't a new thing. 20 years ago, Tom DeLay, who's a blast from the past for a lot of viewers, was the Republican whip in the House and the majority leader, and he got Texas to redraw its districts. I want to say it was for the 2004 election, and then lo and behold, 2 years later, the House flipped. I think one thing that happens with these partisan divides being so sharp as they are, all the people in power try to redraw lines. They try to redraw the rules in order to benefit themselves at the margins, rather than doing the harder work of actually appealing to people across the political divide to make their party bigger. And I think it's one of the reasons we're stuck in this cycle of not only being deeply divided, but essentially evenly divided.
Maeve, there was this political poll last week that found that 64% of Californians support keeping the independently drawn maps, which, by the way, Arnold Schwarzenegger, this was a big deal at the time when we did go to independently drawn maps in California. But Gavin Newsom's pollster is out there saying that they have their own poll that says 57% of the people support the specific redistricting plan. And that support appears to have increased as voters are learning more about the measure. How tied do you think Californians are to this independent redistricting redistricting plan that was sort of the pride of the California political establishment when it was first put into place. Arnold Schwarzenegger's even coming out saying he doesn't support what Gavin Newsom is doing.
Yeah, and it'll be really interesting to see what role he decides to play here beyond wearing anti-gerrymandering T-shirts to the gym, which he did last week. But, obviously the Independent Redistricting Commission is very, very popular among California voters. But there's also a political reality here, which is that, Democrats dominate the state. There obviously are very many independents as well. And of course, the Redistricting Commission is very popular among independents. But a lot of them are kind of partisan leaning. And, what Newsom and other Democratic lawmakers here are doing is, making the case that this is going to be a referendum on Trump, a check on his power, and pointing to things like the One Big Beautiful Bill as examples of what's at stake if Trump is able to get his way and add, many more Republican seats before the election in 2026. So I think that, public opinion here feels very fluid. And it also, to the point of those polls, really gets at like how you ask the question and whether people, fully understand the concept of what's going to be on the ballot in November. So I think that there's going to be sort of a lot of twists and turns in the campaign ahead. And, whichever side is able to make the stronger argument will prevail.
I hesitate to even talk about this, but we saw the president taking this walkabout in Washington tonight, and he seemed to be talking about everything but the law enforcement presence and the National Guard out on the streets and his sort of the stated goal of why he was doing this. I mentioned him before, but literally not only the White House ballroom and all this, but that he knows grass, Tim, better than anybody else. What was he doing? What was happening out there?
The weave, I think, is what he calls it, Jacob. I don't know, man. The interesting thing about this is the grass was actually something that was in his jurisdiction before all of this. Kind of a weird quirk of D.C. is that the parks are actually run by the feds. And if this was a legitimate effort to curtail crime in D.C., without, wanting to like bring in the show of the National Guard force and, all of the pictures that he likes, like that picture right there, they could have done stuff to make the parks safer. There are a lot of parks in D.C. You could have, all just traditional good government stuff, more lights, have a couple more police patrols through them from time to time. That was something that was within their jurisdiction. They decided not to do that, of course, to go straight to, militarizing the National Police and having these masked guys, go hassle DoorDash drivers and things of that nature. So I think like what this all comes down to is that he wants the show. Like he wants, for there to be a lot of political theater around this. Maybe he hopes that's a deterrent in some way, but I think mostly he wants to use it as a political wedge.